I looked at where I was headed and I would have made a lot of money, but I would have been working 70 hours, 80 hours a week just to make some other guy rich. I don't want to give that much time doing stuff I don't really like. It's like, I'm like, it didn't make sense to me. I have I sleep in a twin bed. All the dividend people, they're like, yeah, dividend growth, just traditional dividend growth is like, you need 30 years. I'm like, I don't have 30 years. A lot of times people who are living paycheck to paycheck, they're used to just running from their problems. If I listened to society and what norms would be, I wouldn't be where I'm at. I just don't spend money. The frugality is huge. But I also feel like I haven't sacrificed life. Last year was the first year of my life where my passive income, I actually made more than my W-2 job. So maybe my advice is make sure you have life outside of finance. There's freedom in not caring so much about money. And I'm not saying if you're scared of losing 100K, go lose 100K. That's not what I mean by facing your fears, but people might roll their eyes at me or think I'm kind of quirky. I'm not living for you and your expectations.
Investors, welcome back to another go-round of Masters of the Market. Now, this week I am amped up as I have Ken Birdsey on with me, who is on the journey to fire, if not already there, with over 1.2 million net worth. But he has had a long story, tried and true, made his way through a lot of trialing and erroring. So here we are today with Ken. Ken, welcome to Masters of the Market. I just want to throw the first question right over to you, ask you about your story and all of these trials and tribulations that you've had until you've found dividend investing.
Sure. I grew up in Pasadena, California, LA, number 6 of 7 kids. And we grew up in a kind of a wealthy area, but we weren't wealthy at all. And my dad was such a penny pincher, and I didn't realize it at the time. But, like we'd go out to dinner and we'd go to like Burger King. My dad would get like one large Coke and put it into small water cups for us and we'd drink them. And like that was a special treat to me. I didn't know that. But one thing that I noticed different between me and my other siblings, I tended to, even at a very young age, I thought very much in regards to cost benefit analysis. I didn't use that term, but I was, I look back and I was doing that. I very much kind of naturally had a natural sense of delayed gratification for some reason. I remember I would stack my like birthday gifts and Christmas gifts to build up like a gaming system or something. And I needed the parts, but it would take like maybe 2 years of gifts. And I noticed all my siblings, they'd get like a gift and it would be done by the next year. So they all thought I was like super spoiled because I had all this stuff. And they were like, why do you have all? I'm like, I would go back and I'm like, you got this, 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 and this. You don't have it anymore. I've always been sort of a natural saver in a way. I started working at like age 13. So I got a job at Fox's restaurant being a Saturday dishwasher. So I'd ride my bike up there and wash dishes. And age 13, I earned like $500 or something. So yeah, so I started working very young and I've just always worked. Really, my plan since junior high was to be a lawyer. That's what I was heading towards. I got into the best high school and then I got into good college and all that was going on. And I'm at age 16, we moved from Pasadena. We sold the house and moved to Laverne, and I ended up crashing my car, and everything changed. I couldn't go to my old high school. My whole plan was falling apart. At that point, I just went to the new school, and I'm trying to figure it out. And I'm like, I'll just go to this new school for a year, fix my car, and then go back to my private school because that's where I need to graduate from to get back on my plan. Well, that didn't happen. I ended up making a ton of new friends. I ended up getting really involved in a local church, and that just changed my entire perspective on everything. And so I go off to college. I'm studying political science. Things just continue down this path, and I realized I don't want to be a lawyer. I looked at where I was headed, and I would have made a lot of money, but I would have been working 70 hours, 80 hours a week just to make some other guy rich. I'm not afraid of work, but I don't want to give that much time doing stuff I don't really like just so other guys can be rich. Like I'm like, it didn't make sense to me. So instead of making a ton of money, I ended up doing something that I really wanted to do, which made no money at all. I went into campus ministry, and the ministry that I joined, you raise your own support. I raised money and it goes to the organization, but that's how I got paid. So I'm getting paid very little. However, even though I was getting paid very little, I still had more expendable income than most people I know. And this has been true of my entire life. Like going forward from this point, all my friends are making way more than me, but they have less expendable income. And so part of that was I'm very unconventional. So, for example, even though I'm out of college and I'm doing this, I always lived with lots of roommates, partly because I'm very social and I wanted to do that, but also because I never wanted to spend that much money on rent. And so I always had my expenses super low. I'm also very, very frugal. So I'm just naturally cheap to the point where it's been a problem at times, to be honest. So I'm not as bad as my dad, thank God. But yeah, I have that. And I've tried to use that for more good than evil, if you will, but there's been moments, let's just put it that way. And so all of a sudden I would have, money in the bank and I wouldn't really think about how to get there. I would turn around and I'm making maybe 30,000 a year. And after a year, I got like 10,000 in the bank, and I'm like, oh, okay. And so I first started investing, back in like the 90s, during the dot boom craze. So I had a couple buddies my age and we were all just buying and buying. And it was like throwing darts in a dark room and just hitting a bullseye every time. Like you couldn't lose. It was like ridiculous. So I would just anything you bought was just going up and up and up. And so you just got this air of like confidence, and it's false confidence. So I didn't know anything about P ratios. I didn't know anything about, it was a tech company, boom. And so if you chose the right ones, like if you chose Amazon back then, like great. So I don't even remember what I invested in. I just remember when it all blew up, like I lost pretty much everything. Everything at that point was maybe I got up to 75,000. For me, that's like the most I ever had. And then it went down to like 5. And I'm like, oh well. That was kind of a bummer, but I don't dwell on things. I just sort of moved on. I ended up having different phases. So after that happened, I didn't get back in the market for a little bit. Got back in the market. Okay, this is the most depressing story of my whole investing career. I had all these stocks, and one of the stocks I bought was Apple. And I don't even remember, 70 shares or something. And I bought them maybe like $10 a share. And this is before
Jeez.
like split. Okay. I think maybe my $70 was up to like 700 or something at one point. And my older brother was getting into investing and he would spend time reading stuff. I'm too lazy for all that. I'm like more intuitive in a lot of ways. So he would read everything. So he's really smart. I was just like taking some of his advice. He's like, you should sell Apple. This is before Steve Jobs came back. Okay. That's how long ago it was. It was before the iMac and all that stuff. And Apple was like dying. He's like, you should sell Apple. You're at a profit. I'm like, I've never sold for a profit to date. Like I've made profit, but I've held too long and lost this. So I was like, Apple's like an emotional one for me. I'm a fanboy, so maybe I should sell it. So I sold for a profit. I made $500 or something. That would have been worth over 500,000 today. And I'm like, oh well, what can you do?
I feel like your brother now lives with an IOU.
That's not the only thing he cost me. He also got me into my first REIT, and I didn't even know what REITs were, but it was during the 2018 craze, and that's where I first got into dividends. This dividend payout was insane. And so I was just dripping and I was just letting the dividends grow and grow and grow, and I was buying more, and the share price wasn't changing a whole lot. It was sitting around 70, 75. Dividend yield was insane. So I got up to like 98,000 or something. I'm like, when I hit 100, I'll cash out. And then overnight, during just the whole crash, the stock goes from 75 when market closes, and I'm watching it overnight, and I have nothing. I couldn't do after hours trading at this time. So I'm watching it just go down, go down, go down. And I'm like, what the heck? Opens the next morning at $10. So, I've lost whatever, 70%. And I had another buddy, old college buddy, who was investing at that point. He's like, well, you should at least sell some, like take some, and I should have listened to him because I basically let it go to zero. So I have a hard time selling, as you can tell. So I lost completely everything in the 2008 crash, not 18, the 2008 housing crash. I actually saw that coming like 3 years before, but for some reason I didn't make a connection with this REIT. And I told my brother, I was like, hey, I'm like, you're following this a lot closer than me. If you see any,
You go back to the brother.
yeah, I'm like, if you see any, like if you see anything weak in their balance sheet or anything, just let me know. but he's like, no, the balance sheet is strong. So, yeah, my brothers cost me a lot of money. Um, it was after that that I stopped listening to him. Got out of the market again, and then I had another run with this Greek shipping company that also paid great dividends. Made a ton of money on that, and then all of a sudden, I got rug pulled. So I got out of the market completely. I ended up moving to Turkey, and I'm teaching at a university. I start my own nonprofit. I buy a place in Turkey. That's the first time I buy a property, renting out my rooms there. So I get the first experience of kind of being a landlord, if you will. And I'm actually, saving a lot of money in Turkey. So I'm making money teaching, I'm renting rooms, I'm doing all this other stuff. I end up selling my place when I leave Turkey, but I don't sell it outright. I actually still hold the paper on that because I sold it to some friends. So I didn't make a huge windfall. I got like a down payment. But when I came home, I had, like 30 grand or something.
Sure.
And I looked around LA because I wanted to buy something, but I wasn't making much money at this point. So I couldn't really count my Turkish income. So I came back and I just was working like at a high-end outdoor furniture store. So I got a bunch of different random jobs. My income was probably like 45,000 a year or something. And this is 2015. So, it's not much money. And somehow I cobbled together enough to qualify to buy something. So I ended up buying a townhome in LA, in Gardena specifically. It was 3 bedroom, and I get some down payment assistance. I get everything I can just as a new home buyer. So I get it. Now, there was a tenant, a Section 8 tenant in there at the time, single mom, and she was like really worried, because there's way more demand than supply for Section 8 in LA. And as a single mom of like 5 kids, she didn't have a lot of options.
Sure.
I'm looking with one of my sisters at this point. I'm looking at the rent and I'm looking at my expenses and I'm like, you know what? Take as long as you need.
Sure.
I'm not going to kick you out. Take as long as you need. Because I'm thinking I'm cash flowing from day one in LA. It wasn't much, but it was like cash flowing and not paying a dime. So I'm like, okay, this is the way to go. So that's when I really kind of got turned on to real estate. And after these three like booms and busts in the market is when I was like, I don't trust the market. There's too many big fish who can just manipulate it. It's out of my control. When I own something, it's mine. Like it's just less manipulable. I have more control. So that's when I went full into real estate and I had nothing in the market at this point. I mean, maybe I had like an old 401k sitting somewhere from previous job, but I wasn't putting any money in the market. So I really dive into this and I get onto bigger pockets and I'm reading all this stuff and I connect with these people and I zero in on Cleveland because I'm like, I can't really do a lot in LA. I can't, at this point, it's 2016, the prices are already priced me out. Oh, at the same time as when I started the job I'm in now. So I ended up randomly falling into working for American Airlines as a flight attendant. They put me out in Miami. So I moved to Miami. So I never move into the place I bought. In fact, that tenant is still there. It's been almost,
And
what
good
it's
to
been,
you.
9 years. She's still there. And I just raise the rent every year. So at this point, that one place is cash flowing about $1,100 a month. So I ended up buying all these duplexes in Cleveland for like 40 grand, but they're crap. They're total crap. But then all of a sudden, like property management is hard to find. And then I hire this guy because he's cheap and he's a crook. And this is where my cheapness really killed me because I'm trying to like fix plumbing issues and I'm calling people. I'm trying to just do it as cheap as possible. But then I'd have to like bring in another plumber to just fix what that first guy did. And I also learned with real estate, like in low cost areas, you can get better deals, but you have a few things working against you. One, property managers are making very little on each property, so they don't really care. And I don't really blame them. I mean, if you're earning literally $60 a month to manage my whole property, like how much attention are you going to give it? It's really hard to find good property management unless you have huge scale. Also in those areas, like in LA, if I hire like a plumber and they just take off of my money or do something, they're costing themselves hundreds of thousands of dollars going forward because the prices are so much higher here and the scale's different. it's not worth it for them to burn their customers. But in a place like Cleveland, when somebody's not making very much money and they're literally living paycheck to paycheck, if anything goes wrong in their life and they use the money I gave them for materials to just bail themselves out to pay their own rent or something, they ghost you. So instead of like just dealing with the issue and saying, hey, this is what happened and I used your money, like I'm willing to finish the, like, instead of just being an adult about it, a lot of times people who are living paycheck to paycheck, they're used to just running from their problems. And that's how they stay in that life. And so I kind of felt bad for them, but I kept getting screwed by it too. So there's that sort of combination. And then obviously when you're out of state, you're far away, anything could happen. I ended up trying to rehab these things from afar, and it ended up just being a huge stressor. So at one point I had 5 duplexes. The guy that I was sourcing me these ended up being a total crook. I ended up getting a lawyer and chasing him out of town. I ended up getting some money back from him. All in all, I ended up just selling everything and kind of breaking even in the end. So what it ended up being was a forced savings account. I sold one property to buy the property I'm in now, which is a new construction townhome. It's 4-bedroom. And I bought this place in 2019 is when I signed the contract. When I signed it, I had to put down like $500. I sensed that it was under market value when I was buying it in 2019. So I'm like, this is a no-brainer. I'm risking almost nothing. And if the market crashes, I walk away. But it was dirt at the time. So if it takes them a year and a half or 2 years to build my place and it goes up in value to it, I've locked in the price for almost nothing. And then COVID hit and I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen here, but it went crazy. So when I moved in, I probably had 150 in equity just from day one, at least. My thought worked out in that way. And then I bought a 4-bedroom with the intent of renting out the extra rooms, which I've done. And it's worked out. Plus being a flight attendant, I'm gone all the time. And originally it was going to be all other flight attendants. So no one's around. So that was my original plan, was most of my cash flow plan was going to come from real estate. And I started getting into dividends at this point, like just kind of watching videos about them and stuff. So I was like, most of my passive income is going to come from this, but I'm going to try to start building up some passive income in dividends too. But it was like, I think at the time I was looking at maybe trying to get to the point where I was getting 4,000 a month. Once again, I live really cheap, so that's easy for me to live off of. My expenses are like 1,500 a month at most. So yeah, so that 4,000, it was like 3,000 from rentals and 1,000 for dividends. Wow, that's completely shifted. COVID hits. I'm completely out of the market still, but I start buying American Airlines stock. I feel like, I'm like, I think we're undervalued. Like, I think there's pressure keeping it down. So I'm just kind of buying a little bit. And I'm buying over like, I think I started buying in 2018. So I'm buying like kind of regularly, just a little bit here and there over a couple of years. And then COVID crash, 2020, it starts dropping from like 25 down to 20. I buy some more. It drops to 18. I buy some more. Drops to 12. I buy a ton more. It drops to 10. I buy a ton more. I'm just buying American Airlines. Like, and that's the only stock I'm watching, and I'm just piling in because but at this time, anything you're buying that's going to survive, you're getting at a huge discount, right? So then there's that immediate bounce. So I just put a sell order in for like 21 or something, go to bed, and I wake up and it went through. So I sold all my American Airlines stock, made like 15K or something, I don't know. And then I took all that money and I bought mostly into VYM. I might have bought a few other ETFs, but that's when I transitioned all that money into dividends. And that's when I went all in on dividends. And then I started buying individual dividend stocks. Income ETFs started coming out, and I got into like QLD and some of those things to up my yield. And then Yield Max came out, and I'm like, well, they're kind of doing what I'm doing with my own money. There's a lot more to the story, but I'm a talker. So sorry, that was a long story. But at this point, I'm basically trying to get, I'm basic cash flowing about 1,100 from that one rental. And then I'm at about 3,200 a month average on my dividends.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that includes like some of the higher yielding income stuff as well. My goal is to raise that an average of 500 a month every year for the next few years, but I'm kind of getting ahead of that right now. It's starting to snowball. I'm starting to really start to feel the snowball at this point. And then I sell options is the other way I get some income. I got into options years ago where I was buying calls. My greatest one was like I bought Google then like before earnings. Like earnings were after hours. So I put like $1,000 in a call on Google. I really didn't even know what I was doing. And I woke up the next morning and sold it for like 14,000. So I made like 13,000 in my sleep. I'm like, wow. And then I lost it all in other options that went to zero. So I was like, screw options. But then I was like, oh, but you can sell options. So that's when I really got into like selling cash secured puts or selling covered calls. And a lot of what I do now is credit spreads. I'm just the way I'm wired. I know my own psychology. I'm much better at, I'm just a natural optimist and I'm very positive. So I do much better betting things will go up than betting things will go down. And so even if I know they're going down, I generally don't bet that. It's very hard for me to bet that because I just know my own psychology. It's just, it doesn't work for me.
When I hear your whole story, and even when we were talking before the chat, what was fascinating to me is like burn after burn after burn. You just shared it, right? Like you're a natural optimist. I want to know where you think that optimism comes from. And I also want to dive a little bit deeper into like when you shared about your childhood and just being naturally frugal. Like how important do those two factors of frugality and optimism play into your investment strategy today or even along the way? Because so many people can, at least I feel like, would have cut ties with the market, forget real estate, right? Like you've just been burned so many times, I'm out. But you have stayed in, and not only have you stayed in, you've reaped the success of it all with the net worth of over 1.2 million.
I can sit here and look back and be like, oh, but it could be three. But that doesn't get me anywhere. I'm very logical and I'm very practical. So I'm like, why would I do that to myself? Right. I have friends who can't do that. So I just feel very fortunate. But yeah, I mean, I did get out of the market a few times and I did get out of state. Like I learned things, I get out, but and then I learn more and I get back in and then I learn stuff. So in some ways, a lot of it is I think there's freedom in not caring so much about money. I know that sounds really weird on a financial channel, but I've never chased the money. I could earn way more than I do. And that's been true my entire life. I easily could have been a lawyer and making tons of money. I taught myself to code and I thought about going into coding, but I didn't want to sit in front of a computer all day. I easily could make 150, I could get 150,000 job tomorrow and then work my way up to 300. I got into aviation and I got friends who have moved over to the pilot side and they're constantly trying to get me to move over to the pilot side. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to. I've never been motivated by the money. So instead of making 300,000 a year, I don't think I've ever made from a W-2 job. I don't think I've ever made more than 70 a year. And last year was the first year of my life where my passive income and my options and all that stuff, I actually made more than my W-2 job. And that's just going to be more and more as we go. So last year was the first year of my entire life that all of it combined, I made over 100,000. So I've never been a high income earner ever. The frugality is huge. I literally am living off 12 to 15,000 a year for everything. So if I make 60,000 and I'm living off 15, okay, you just do the math there.
Yeah.
That leaves me with 45,000. Now, honestly, you take taxes out and stuff, but you don't pay that many taxes on 60. So let's just say 5,000 for taxes. That means I have $40,000 to invest or to buy property or do whatever I want with on a $60,000 salary. That's where frugality is huge. It's enormous. Because if you think about someone who's making 120, but they're spending, 60,000 a year plus their taxes, they got about the same. And that's assuming they're living pretty good. Because if you're making that much money, you're probably not having roommates. You're probably not doing these other things. I'm just really good at finding free food. I don't pay for a gym because I have hotel gyms or I work out at the park with a pull-up bar. Like, I just don't spend money. But I also feel like I haven't sacrificed life. And so as a result, like, a lot of people want to get to fire so they have freedom, which is a lot of my motivation too. But I also feel like in a way, I've also had freedom. Like I've never really done a job I don't want to do. If I'm in it and I don't like it, I quit. I got to live overseas. I've been to 83 countries. Like I've never not lived a life. And so I do a lot of things that people want to do in their retirement. And so, yeah, maybe I'm not getting to fire as fast as I could because I didn't focus on just earning as much as I could. But at the same time, I've kind of been living fire in a way. It is funny when I found fire, though, because when I found fire, it was kind of earlier days of fire. So it was like Mr. Money Mustache was like the guy. There wasn't like all these channels yet. There wasn't all this other stuff. So there wasn't Fat Fire or there wasn't, it was just Fire. Back then, it was very much about getting your expenses low. Like if you only need 10 grand a year to live, you can retire a lot easier. That was the premise of old school Fire. And I'm like, I found my people. It was the first time in my life where I'm like, I've been I've been that guy who's living off 10 grand a year forever, but now there's other people who are doing it. So I was like, I'm not as crazy as I think.
There's so many people that I feel like I already know will be out there in the comments sharing, no, it was all luck, or there's no way this can be done. And I've seen it. I mean, I've had multiple people on who never made over $100,000, but like you, they're very frugal. I'm curious to know your message to these individuals when people are saying there's no way you could do this without making over $100,000.
I mean, obviously there is. So, but it does take being very unconventional. A lot of people aren't willing to have roommates. They're not. And so if I didn't have roommates, okay, I don't want my roommates to hear up there. My my total housing costs, and this is, mortgage interest, insurance. I actually pay extra on my mortgage every month to get it down. It's my HOA fee, my utilities, and it includes Wi-Fi. So all of that, my monthly expense is about $600. If my roommates weren't here, it'd be about 4,000. So I don't really count that as income, but I'm making minimum 3,000 a month off having roommates, right? So I'm making $35,000 to $40,000 a year because I don't mind having roommates. Now, granted, I'm just wired that way, but it's really not a big deal. You can make anything work. But we live in a society where, I'm 51 years old. A 51-year-old man does not have roommates. If I listened to society and what norms would be, I wouldn't be where I'm at because I do a lot of things that 51-year-old men aren't supposed to do. But I don't care. I'm not living for you and your expectations. It's like I'm living my life. And as far as luck, I mean, I've had a lot of bad luck in a lot of
To say
ways.
the least.
Yeah, I mean, I've never had help. Like my dad passed away 10 years ago. We got nothing. He didn't have anything. He was an aerospace engineer. He made a lot of money, but by the end of his life, he had nothing. So I've got no inheritance. It's just really about, making life your own. And so, a lot of people just follow the norms. Okay, when I lived in Turkey, I had a good friend who was a dentist. And so he was making a lot of money for Turkey. He gets engaged. And so we meet up. And in Turkey, that you have an engagement party with both families. That's a big deal and all this stuff. So we meet up and he's showing me the pictures and he's showing me the chocolates. And he's like, you know how much those cost? And he's sort of bragging about how much he spent on this engagement thing. And I'm like, dude, you spent that much on chocolates? That's so dumb. And and he looks at me and he knows me. He knows like I'm sort of cheap, like he would be like, he'd call me like, hey, I'm going to the beach, but we're going to the beach that cost like 20 lira. And I know because there's a beach right next door. It's the same water and sand that's free. I'm like, well, why would you do that? To be anyways. So I'm like, that's so dumb. And all of a sudden his whole body sinks and his whole demeanor changes. And for the first time, he's with someone that he can just admit, like, oh, dude, the pressure sucks. I hate it. And he begins to just spill to me how much he hates having to spend this much. But he's like, if you want to marry someone that good looking and into the family, like that's what you have to do. He goes, I loved my simple car, but because I'm a dentist and I'm getting married, like I had to get a new car. I was the first person in his life that he could be honest with, that he hated this system he was caught up in. But all his Turkish friends were caught up in it too, so he couldn't have that conversation. So even with me, even though he knows I'm not like that, he started out in this bragging mode. And when I was just like called him out on it, he admitted it's nothing to brag about. There's a lot of people who, they're paying $300 a month to go to Equinox so they can be seen or so they can make connections. But are you? Are you making connections? Like, and then if you are, what's happening with those? I don't know. Like maybe that's really beneficial for certain industries or certain people, but there's a lot of people spend a lot of money on a lot of things.
I feel, which is nuts. I feel your energy come across this chat. Like I can feel it through the screen as to say, like, everything you are sharing, I can hear it like deep down within you saying, like, I genuinely don't care about these things. Like there are things in life that don't matter. And I say this a lot, which is like we're so focused on impressing everybody else, right? To get the car, to get the nice apartment, to get X, Y, and Z. And at the end of that rat race, if you will, of life, you look back and you're like, well, what did you really do? Did you really
Yeah.
have freedom? Where do you think most of us are going wrong? Because there are actually very, yes, there's the masses of us, like the fire, income earners, but
Yeah.
I feel like when I look around, the everyday Joe is not that frugal. And we are stuck in that mindset of, leveling up with the Joneses. Where does this all come from and how do we stop it?
Well, I mean, we live in a consumer oriented economy. Like this economy exists on debt and on purchasing, on buying things. And so, I mean, think about how much of your day is filled with just commercials, whether it's online, whether it's on TV, whether it's radio, podcast, like so much of the economy in entertainment, basically the things we consume for our entertainment are funded by things that want us to consume with our money. So the things that consume our time make money by the things that consume our money. And so we're willingly exposing ourselves to just messages all day, every day. Community osmosis, like conditioning. So, like I said, there's a lot of people, okay, I'll give you an example. I sleep in a twin bed. Okay. I get a lot of crap for having a twin bed. But a queen or king bed doesn't make sense to me. I don't need it. I sleep in king beds all the time in hotels, and I literally sleep on a sliver. I don't need a bigger bed. Obviously, if I was like sexually active or something, that's a different story. I understand that side of it. Personally, I'm not. I like women, don't get me wrong, but I'm not in a
Yeah.
relationship. I'm not married. I'm not doing any of that. So it's just that's not really a factor for me, right? So I'm like, why would I give up real estate in my room for a larger bed where the sheets cost more and the mattress costs more? Like, explain to me why. Like, logically, there's no reason for me. Now, there's some people who are like, I like to be, I'm like, that's fine. Or I like to sleep with my pet. I'm like, if you have reasons, that's fine. But I don't have a single reason why I should get a bigger bed. And people still want to fight me on it. I'm like, why do you care? So I really don't care. And I've never cared. Like, if I'm in a room of 50 people who all think it's dumb that I have a twin bed, I don't care. I know it's not dumb. I know it would be dumb to have a king bed in my room because I'd be wasting space with unused things. I understand the logic. You're not speaking logic. You're speaking either personal opinion or you're speaking personal preference or you're speaking cultural norms. But none of those are logic. That's not, anyways. So yeah, I think, and I honestly, I've had a lot of friends and I still make friends. Like it hasn't cost me relationships. Like at the end of the day, people might roll their eyes at me or think I'm kind of quirky, but it doesn't make them not want to hang out with me. Like it's like we're too scared of a lot of things. I'm like, I wish I knew how to get rid of people's fear. I see it so much. There's so much anxiety and fear and it's getting worse and worse. And it actually burdens me because I don't know what to do about it. Because all my friends are just burdened with that fear. I'm like, gosh, it's holding you back in so many ways.
I think this is the most epic conversation I've ever had on Master of the Market because it's real. Is it that we're not living intentionally?
I mean, I think you could say that's part of it. People just sort of getting in their rut and just going through their day. Like, yeah, I think it's easy. I think it's easy for everybody to just get sucked into, I go to work, I come home, I watch Netflix, and you're not really evaluating your decisions or your life. You're just on autopilot. If your margins are low, if you don't have a lot of income space to feel that peace, if you don't have, the physical energy, maybe you're eating like crap and you're not working out. And so you're just always exhausted. Like there's a lot of reasons where we could get to the place where, I don't have the space or the time or the capacity to even evaluate my situation. Like for me, it's easier to be intentional, but I also know I'm not normal in a lot of ways. It's funny. Years ago, when I was doing campus ministry, I was living with a one of the students, and we were talking about like nonconformists or something, like people who are dressing. And I go, what's sort of ironic about nonconformists is they all conform to being nonconformists, right? And he goes, "Oh, you're so right." And he goes, he looked at me with this like big aha moment. He goes, "You're the nonconformist." And I go, I've never been called that, but yeah, and a lot of people are. There's a lot of insecurity. Everybody lives with insecurity. Everybody does, but there's different levels of it. And most people they're just carrying around so much insecurity and so much weight of that the idea of looking stupid or looking cheap or looking like a fool is just, there's too much pressure there that would just crumble them. So you gotta get to a place where you find security, like whether it's in relationships or whether it's in God or whatever it is, you got to get to that place where, like, hey, God or my girlfriend or my family, they love me no matter what. So if everybody else doesn't love me, like I can survive. And then you start taking that risk. And then you realize all those people you were worried about judging you, they're worried about being judged. Even when you get free of that and you just start doing things you tell them things you were scared to tell them, it actually makes you more approachable, makes you more valuable. But there's a lot of people who would not be able to tell you, oh, I got ripped off in Cleveland, or like these things, because they're like, for me, one of the things I guess that's been part of my identity is that, I've always been intelligent. So I've always done really well in school and all these other things. So that really attacks that narrative. The fact that I got taken by a guy who's an idiot, the guy's really an idiot. He's dumb, but he took me. He beat me. He outsmarted me, or the fact that like I made dumb decisions, like sold out or whatever these things. Like that goes straight against my narrative of my identity of I'm a smart guy. Smart people can make dumb decisions and still be smart. So it's like, so once you get over that, you're like, oh, okay. I'm I'm
Those
a
dumb decisions give you the wisdom later on in life. It's your experience, I feel like. And through every, I want to say circle of fire that you've tried to leap through, and some of them you made it through, and other ones, perhaps it's the crash and burn. You still never gave up, and a lot of people would. And I wouldn't call it reckless. I wouldn't call it anything other than like you just enjoying.
when you're cliff diving and you're on top of that cliff, like your stomach's kind of knotted up, and if you force yourself to jump, it's fun. So the next jump is not scary at all. It's that first jump that's scary, but the second, third, fourth jump is just pure bliss. Like you're not scared. So it's like anything. If you lose 100 grand and you're still living and you still have your life and you're still able to, go to the beach, like you're like, okay, like
The
it
next
really,
100, whatever.
I mean, in a way, like it didn't kill me. So there's a lot of things that we're scared of. And I'm not saying if you're scared of losing 100K, go lose 100K. That's not what I mean by facing your fears, but it's like once these things happen, um, they happen. And one of the things I think one of the things that when these crashes happened, they weren't my whole life. Like I'm probably more into finance now than I ever have been. So back then when I was into it, I didn't I didn't have a fire goal. I wasn't thinking, I don't even know what I was thinking. I was just trying to make money, I guess. It wasn't I didn't put all my marbles in that basket. Like I loved what I was doing. It was giving me so much life, like the campus ministry. And I had great teams. And when those things happened, they didn't take anything away from the bulk of my life, which was where most of my life was coming from. So I think if my whole life and future and hope was just in the money, then maybe it would have affected me more. But because I had so much life coming from other areas, when the money didn't work out, it was just a smaller hit in a way. I could see where some people that's their entire everything, that would be a lot more devastating. So maybe my advice is make sure you have life outside of finance.
I was gonna say, like, don't make money your god, so to speak. Portfolio wise, when you
Yeah.
started dividend investing, how did you start? What did the portfolio amass into? Was it ETFs and then individual stocks, just individual stocks? Like, walk us through this transformation for the portfolio.
Yeah, like I said, my first big buy was VYM, and the reason I wanted to do that was it has like 500 dividend stocks or something, and so my thought was instant diversification, in this fund, and I like the idea of the fund because it was more passive. So they have their metrics on how they choose they have their formula of what stocks get in, they fall in the FTSE and all that stuff. So if a company stops paying dividend, I don't have to like monitor all that. The ETF just takes them out. So I really like that aspect. So it's like instant diversification and automation. So I bought a huge, and that was my original idea. I just want to buy like VYM, and I bought a few others just to sprinkle in some ETFs. But then I started getting into dividends and watching a bunch of dividend channels and doing all this stuff. And I started buying individual dividend stocks. And they've all done well, but I have way too many. And there's a lot of overlap with these. And then getting into the income funds. So the first one I did was QYLD. So I bought oh, actually, no. Before QYLD. So I had a bunch of BYM. I had a few other ETFs like SCH. No, I didn't have SCHD yet. Anyways, I just had some other ones. And then I had a bunch of stocks. I had Exxon, and I had, MO, and, KO, and I just had all kinds of stuff. But, I'm not, the one downfall for me is I'm not the most patient person. So like when you look at like my Cleveland housing buy, like I bought like duplex, I just did it really fast. If I was more patient, I probably would have avoided some of the mistakes. Who cares? It is what it is. So I'm looking at this, I'm like, I don't have time. Like I was like 45, I don't remember, at the time. And I'm like, I don't want, like, you need all the dividend people. They're like, yeah, dividend growth, just traditional dividend growth is like, you need 30 years. I'm like, I don't want to, I don't have 30 years. I need to raise my yield a little bit. So I start getting into, BDNs. Is that BDCs? I'm sorry. I haven't talked about this in a while. You know what those are? Like, just
Sure.
the lenders, because they have much higher yielding rates. So I got into some of those, and I got it. I got one of those during COVID. I threw a bunch in there, and I'm up like 150% on that. So that raised my rate, and then looked into some REITs and some of the higher yielding products out there, stocks. Got into some closed-end funds. Honestly, I wish I would have stayed away from those. But anyways, I still have some closed-end funds to get their yield up. And then that's when I got into like QYLD and ROLD and some of those. So I have a bunch of that. What I do with I have a Google sheet. What I do is I drip everything. And when I drip, I put in the new share price, but I don't put in the cost. I have that in my Schwab. I have different ways, but on my Google sheet, what I'm doing is I'm in a sense counting the drip as free money. And so with the drip on QLD, I'm finally positive, but it's taken a while because, it dipped. I had this period where I was buying like SPACs. Do you remember like SPAC fever?
2020, it was crazy.
Yeah. So I got burned
The,
on
the
SPAC.
last the last one I bought was Bill Ackman's SPAC. Nothing
Yeah,
happened.
I bought so many SPACs. Like
Yeah.
I just went out of control. And some of them I have like $200 in, but others I have like 1,000. And it was just like, to me, they were like lottery tickets. I'm like, let's see. I'm down on all of them. I think maybe one not, but it's like, yeah, that was a waste of like probably 20 grand. Like that was stupid. Um, but I still have them all, and some of them like reverse splits. Like I had 500 shares, now I have five. It's like, okay, cool. But yeah, you look at my Google sheet, I'm like down 90%, like all of those. It's like all my dividend portfolio is like green, and then you get down to my SPACs, they're all red.
I
So
I
it's just
still have my SPAC, by the way, from 2020. I had like a few of them. One, a couple of them did well and I sold out. And then I still have one that turned into BurgerFi, and I'm just down like over 3K. I just have it. Like I'm waiting to tax loss harvest, but it's just there. And I'm
yeah,
waiting to just get rid of it.
yeah, like I said, I have a problem selling. So I have all these things. I'm like, well, if I sell it, yeah, that's the only reason I sell it for is tax loss harvesting. But I'm like, even if there's a 1% chance, Joby takes off and next, I'm like, this could blow up. I'm like, in 10 years. I'm like, so why not just leave it? That's that's where my optimism works against me.
Sure.
That's why I'm a bad poker player too. I always just think I'm going to get the card, right? So yeah, so that's my red portion of my portfolio.
How many
And
positions are in there right now, holding
oh,
wise?
way too many.
Like over 100?
Oh gosh. No, I don't think it's that many. Let me see if I can.
Because I mean, on one end of the spectrum, we'll have investors jump on and they'll have, 10 to 20. And then on the opposite end, we have
Oh
guys
yes.
that'll jump on that are like over 100. And
Yeah,
then I always ask the question of like, what's the sweet spot, do you think?
I have 129
There you go.
positions. It's ridiculous. Okay. Yeah.
So
I
so what do you think is a sweet spot? Like how many holdings should we actually aim for? That's manageable.
I mean, it depends on what you want to do. If you want to be a very active dividend investor in like just dividend growth companies, then that might be a way to go. Like, because one, it might be fun for you to do all the research and to do all that stuff. Two, you're avoiding the expense ratio. Three, you can make sure you're not bogging down your winners with some laggers. So that could be a way to go. And if you're doing individual dividend stocks, you might want to have 20 to 30. For me, I do some options trading. My options trading is on like Tesla and those kind of stocks, right? So I own some Tesla and I own some of this because if you're doing a wheel and you end up buying some Tesla and then you're selling covered calls on it and all that stuff. So you need a few positions there. But I think if you're doing options, I think it really helps to have, 1 to 4 tickers that you're really working with
Sure.
and that you really get to know. At one point I shifted and I said, all right, I'm just going to build up VYM, SCHD, which I have a pretty large position in that now, JEPI and JEPQ. Those were going to be my 4 that I was just going to, that's all I'm buying now. And I'm dripping everything else. And I had a goal of like adding 10K to each and all that stuff, which I haven't reached. I got distracted by all the yield max stuff. So I started buying that stuff. But at the end of the day, like when I'm disciplined, I go back to that.
Just the 4.
Like, yeah. And if I had to start from scratch, I'd probably just do those 4.
You wouldn't add any individual dividend stocks in there. You just stick with the 4 dividend paying
Me, no,
ETF.
I wouldn't buy any individual stocks because I don't want to mess with it. I like looking at peer. I like all that stuff, but I don't want to have to. And I don't want to like take a mental break from finance for 3 months and go on vacation or travel around the world or something. And all of a sudden a stock, earnings report come out and it dumps, or they announce they cut their dividend and I miss it. I know that's kind of ridiculous because obviously you'd see it, and I look at my sheets every day. But yeah, for me, I value automation. I value the passive aspect of it. So that's what,
Individual dividend stock wise, I mean, what are some of the top stocks that you have in there now? Some of the positions that you've built up?
so when it comes to portfolio percent, let's see, VYM is at 6.29%. SCHD is 7.34%. QYLD is at 7.67. Oh my gosh, that's too high. Individual stocks, oh, that's JEPQ is at 4 point. See, individual stocks, what's my highest? MFIC, which is a BDC, is at 2.55%. That's my highest there. Actually, none of my individual stocks. BP is at 1.62, and that's just because it's gone up so much. Like I'm up almost 100% on that. I'm at almost 1% of my portfolio there. That's gone up 153%. Geez. That's including the dividend when I say that.
I feel like you've just simplified it all. Like it really is as simple as heading into a dividend ETF and just letting automation do its work. I want to
Yeah.
ask you what you think one of the most common mistakes that investors are making, whether a dividend investor or a growth investor.
I don't know. I don't know what I've seen. I do think people get a little myopic, maybe. I've seen trends. Like SCHD was, like QILD was all anyone talked about for a while. And then all of a sudden QILD sucks. And then like SCHD was all anyone talked about for a while. And then now SCHD sucks. And like there's certain people that are they're all in on the yield max right now. And other people are like the yield max sucks. So I guess where I'm at is I see people discount things too quickly because they don't know what they are. So a lot of people are like yield max, it's a yield trap. Or not even yield max. There's a lot of them now. But the covered the super high yielding options based ETFs, right? Based on individual stocks. People are like, that's a yield trap, or that's, it's going to go. And it's like, okay, no, like I do this with my own stocks. So I know what they're doing. So the question is, am I willing to pay a little bit to have someone who's maybe giving more time and maybe expertise to do it and lose a little bit? I'm like, yeah, that's part of my portfolio anyway. So I have no problem owning those. But then you have people who are like all in on yield max. They're like, I'm going to retire off of this. And maybe they even understand there's going to be some NAV erosion because there is. That's inevitable. So as long as you understand what you're doing, that's probably it. There's people who either invest or don't invest based on not understanding. And I'm like, it doesn't take that long to understand these things. Like just literally, spend a day like just reading about them. Supplement, don't just rely on YouTube channels. Like go and actually go to the YieldMax website and read their strategy, understand what's going on there. And if you are on YouTube, here's the best part about YouTube. If I find like Tesla and I'm like, this is awesome, 70% yield, I can go on YouTube and I can buy, I can search for a negative Tesla or negative YieldMax. Well, why wouldn't I do that? Before I buy Tesla, this guy sold me on Tesla. Before I do that, why don't I go hear all the arguments against Tesla? Let me go find the bear. Let me go find the super pooper, like who's just dumping on this thing. And let me hear his arguments. And then let me take it all in. That literally probably takes me at most an hour to do all that, to watch the pro videos, the anti videos, and to read the YieldMax site. There's a lot of people who will watch the pro video and then go put money in. And it's like, you're not going to miss out that much if you just relax for a second.
What's your process in terms of whether it's selecting a dividend ETF or a dividend stock? Like, what's that process look like for you? What are you looking at? How do you even come up with the idea, if you will?
Well, I don't as much as I used to, but I used to watch and listen to a lot of things. So there's a lot of dividend YouTubers out there who are talking about their portfolios or talking about what they're investing in now. And so I would use that as a starting point, and I would look at and I'm not buying everything they're saying, but I'm looking at those and I'm like, okay, I do look at PE. I know it's not that sexy or fancy anymore, but PE ratios I think matter. I do think looking at like free cash flow and are great. I don't, because a lot of times you have to pay for services to get that. Once again, I'm cheap, but you can get there another way. I'm not pulling up balance sheets and doing deep dives. I'm most like if I'm investing in a company, let's say I'm buying Coke. I'm looking at the PE ratio. I'm looking at the basic fundamentals. It's a product I know. It's a large company. I'm like, Coke freaking owns the world. Like I've been in the outskirts of Kyrgyzstan, and there's nothing Western within miles, but there's Coke. And it's like they don't even have indoor plumbing. Like there's Coke. I'm like, what the heck? So I'm like, Coke may end up dying, but it's going to be a slow death. Like there's no way they're falling off a cliff. And then, obviously for dividends, the amount of years they've been paying without a cut. A lot of people like that stat. I'm okay taking a chance on someone who's not as much history. There's two things I'm willing to give a little grace to. One, if it's a newer paying dividend company, because it's a newer company, period, I'm not going to hold them to the fact that they haven't paid for 50 years. If they've
Sure.
only been around 8 years and they don't make any of the lists, because the easiest list to get on is the 10 years. I'm like, yeah, but they've been paying 8 years and they're a good company. And, I'm not going to discount someone from that if they haven't grown their dividend. Like if they had a cut and so they got bumped off a list, I'm not necessarily going to discount them. I'm going to look at why. So if it's a company that paid consistently, and then let's say it's a REIT and they paid consistently, and then 2008 they dropped their dividend, and then since then they've been raising it again. I'm like, well, yeah, that was like a once in a lifetime global housing crisis. Like I'm going to give them a break for that. But in general, yeah, I do like to see some sort of history.
Using like, for example, whether it was 2008, right, or even COVID. And I feel like you're the type of guy that doesn't really factor macros in as much, but I might be wrong because of optimism, right? But like, how much do macros even play a role for you, or is it kind of just like, this is an opportunity and I'll just go for it?
No, they do. Here's my problem with macros. I'm usually too far ahead of the game. So for example, to me, I was just looking at macros and saying the housing market is unsustainable. In 2006, I was saying that. In 2006, the numbers made no sense to me, but people made money like crazy for 2 years before it backfired. And I didn't, because I'm like, don't get into this. It's crazy. So I was too early. I had a pretty big position in Exxon, and I also had a pretty big position in what's the energy ETF? Why am I blanking on that?
No, energy specific ETF. I'm more
Yeah.
broad market ETFs.
No, no, no. Okay, yeah, it was energy specific. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on it. Anyways, this is horrible. I had a big one in there. So I was building that position. I made a ton. It was way up, and I was like, I don't know. how much longer gas is going to dominate. And I'm looking at the like EV market, and I'm looking at all the laws passing, and I'm looking at all this stuff. And I'm like, I'd rather get out before it's too late. So I get out right before things really blow up. So I was up like 100%. It went up like another 200%. I'm like, oh, dang it. But I did roll some of the money into BP specifically, because out of all the major oil companies, BP was spending the most money on alternative energy sources.
Sure.
Like they seem to be positioning themselves well to go with the direction the economy is going in regards to energy. So, I do look at a lot of different things, but yeah, not too much. I'm not overly active.
If you were to start over, I mean, with all the trials and errors, all the experience that you have today, what would be one thing that you would do differently that would set you up better for success today?
I mean, it depends on when that start over point is, right? I mean, if it was back in the 90s, I would have kept my Apple. But
You blame your brother for that one.
yeah. But as far as my current journey that I'm on now with the dividends and things, I think in a lot of ways, if I just started over, I would have just that 4 ETF strategy I would have stuck with. And then maybe I would have played around a little bit with the higher yielding ones. Just because once again, I almost separate my dividend. I have 3 buckets of, well, technically 4, but the fourth is nothing right now, and it could be something or it could be absolutely nothing. So my 4 buckets of passive income is it's rental income, it's dividend income, it's options income, which isn't necessarily passive, but literally it takes me a minute. And then there's crypto. Right now, that's probably about like $150, just with some Ethereum staking and some AMP staking. So my options income has rolled into my dividend income to some degree with some of like the yield max stuff. I haven't really done that with my numbers. I still count that as dividend income right now, and that's helping me reach my goals. So I'm sort of cheating. But and I still sell options, but my goal is to get it down where I don't really have to even sell options. Because if I'm in like the jungle for a month, I don't want to have to be like, oh crap, I didn't have a chance to sell my options. So I see some of these products as a way to sort of take over the options arm of it, but I still do sell options and make some money that way. The way I'm doing options now, yeah, like if I did that from day one, obviously it would have saved me a lot of heartache and loss.
Ken, I have one last question for you, and
Yeah.
this is going to be a fun one, I feel, but it's my favorite question I get to ask every master of the market who joins me here. If I were to give you $10,000 right now to invest in any individual stock, or for you to throw in the ETFs there as well, which investment opportunity would it be and why?
A few months ago, my checking account just got too big. So once again, like I don't spend money, so I just, and so I literally like 2 months in a row just spent $5,000, right? So I put $5,000 on my mortgage, which is not something I would normally do, but I was just like, if I put $5,000, because I'm still early in this mortgage, I'm like, I would save $8,000. I know if I put the $5,000 in an investment over 30 years, but I'm like, if I sell this house, so I started messing with my head. So I was like, so I just put 5,000 in there, took off like 6 years of my mortgage or something. No, not that many, 3 years of my mortgage or something. I took another 5,000, put it in my Roth, and I think I bought YMAX. So the Yield Max ETF of Yield Max funds,
Sure.
and just put it on drip to forget about it. However, how long is this for? 10,000 for how long?
Any amount of time you want. Longer term usually. So 5 to 10 is what we usually go with, but any amount of time.
I'm pretty big on Tesla still. I mean, I have a ton of puts at 190 that were red for a while. Now, obviously, they're super green. And what I mean by puts is I sold puts, which means I have to buy Tesla at 190. So when it expires, if it's below 190, I have to buy Tesla at 190. But if it's at 200, it just expires worthless, and I get to keep the premium, right?
Sure.
So obviously, I'm like, there's no way Tesla should be in the 190s. And then it recently busted out 250, but I still think it has a lot of room to grow. I think their Optimus robot is got a lot of. Here's the thing. I don't know if everything they're doing is going to work, but there's so many things. So there's energy storage, which finally, that's what made the most recent pop go up, was They finally started making lots of money on energy storage. There's the potential robo-taxi thing. There's other vehicles like the semi has barely started getting sold. That has a potential to really revolutionize the whole semi truck market. Then you have the whole Optimus thing. Then you have Neuralink. To me, that has there's just a lot of room for it to blow up.
Explosive
But
growth.
yeah, I might go Tesla.
I'll take it.
Yeah,
Investors,
I know it's
you're
not very,
go ahead.
it's not a very like sneaker stock or anything, but
No, it's the opportunity. At the end of the day, it's like it's your $10,000. And I think if the conviction is there, to your point, I have Tesla as a dividend investor, right? But I have Tesla because the conviction is there based on product diversification where I see the future going. So
yeah,
your conviction is mine.
and it's just mine. It's not financial advice.
Exactly. None of this has been financial advice, but investors, we have on with us Ken, where can we find you if we wanted to search you or follow your journey?
I have a couple dormant YouTube channels. I have a couple dormant blogs. I have a dormant podcast. I like to create, but then I don't stick with it. But late fire starter or the late fire starter is my channel where you can see my portfolio in detail. Obviously it hasn't been updated in a year or two. So my other dormant YouTube channel is called The Cheap Guy. My idea was to help people save money because I'm really good at it. But then I kind of ran out of ideas.
Well, there we have it. Investors, go follow Ken's channels, keep up to date with what he's doing, how exactly he is making it happen by means of frugality and dividend investing, as well as real estate and options trading. Ken, I want to thank you personally for being on Masters of the Market with me. I do certainly hope to have you back on at some point because we had a heck of a talk to kick this whole thing off with. But investors, until next time, we will see you all there.